Hello, my name is Abdiel Vázquez. This is Maestro in Tune, and I thank you very much for listening, being here with me once again in this second episode of Season 2. And what you were hearing was the beginning of Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings, a beautiful piece composed only for a string orchestra, no wind instruments, no percussions. And this is something that we played recently with my orchestra in Monterrey with La Súper. This happened in March, and it was part of a big month of performances that I had, where I got to do a lot of the different things that I do in my musical life. It all started first with a trip to Virginia, where I was a collaborator. I was a pianist for two wonderful singers, Anya Farisei from Poland, Suchan Kim from South Korea. Singers that you met in a previous episode when I introduced you to the cast of Lucia de la Marmure, which I was conducting at Opera in Williamsburg precisely last fall. So this time I got to accompany them in a recital of songs by Schubert, by Mahler, and by Dvorak. Then the following week, I was in Monterrey, Mexico with my orchestra, with La Súper, conducting. And this time I was conducting a beautiful program for string orchestra that also included soloists, two wonderful soloists, our concert masters, Jimena Escobedo and Marian Sanchez, playing Vivaldi's The Seasons. And then for the next 2 weeks, I was in Mazatlan, Mexico, conducting opera. This time we were doing La Traviata, and this was a production of Vincerò Academy together with Esceni Ensemble, which is the production company of Ragnar Conde, our stage director, and the city of Mazatlan, the Institute of Culture. They provide the theater, they provide the orchestra, they provide all this infrastructure. Ragnar Conde brings his expertise as a stage director, and me as the artistic director of Vincerò Academy. We put together the cast. So all the cast members were alumni or students of Vincerò Academy. So it was a beautiful, beautiful experience to put all of this together with people from all over the world to do the La Traviata of Giuseppe Verdi in a full production. And then I went back to Monterrey and finally to New York to present a solo piano recital, which I talked about in my previous episode. And in that episode, I mentioned at the beginning how I wanted to tell you a bit how is it different to perform a solo recital compared to conducting only orchestra, to conducting opera, and to accompanying singers, all these different things that I do. I didn't get to talk about it in the previous episode, so that's what I want to talk about today, or at least that's what I wanted to talk about today. But I also wanted to start with reflection on, and this is very, very personal actually, because it's the death of José Mujica. And if this surprises you, well, it's maybe because I don't talk enough about politics as I actually love to do so in person. Or maybe I do talk a lot about it and you have already noticed. But I never mentioned like figures or names or any particular, party or anything like that. But José Mujica was a big, big inspiration for me in my early youth. He was the president of Uruguay when I was coming of age, and I was always so inspired by him and by everything he had to say. In his background as a revolutionary and spending more than 10 years as a prisoner of war, and then coming out of that and becoming all the way to become the president of Uruguay, and then doing a lot for the people to address poverty and to live by his ideals and to live by his principles. And these principles are such that they have actually played a big role in shaping my own. And I remember back in the day, one of his interviews, he talked about time. And forgive me if what I'm gonna say is very obvious to you or something that's very self-evident, but it would seem to me that even if it should, sometimes it isn't, right? Or we forget. And this idea that our time at the end is the most valuable thing, and how we spend our time is really something that we should think about. On how do we want to be spending our time? And sure, work is a big part of it. And most of the times we find ourselves working. We find ourselves working because we want to pay, not just for the rent or for our bills, but maybe for our idea of progress, or our idea of, like, you want to buy a better phone, you want to buy a better car, you want to upgrade to a bigger apartment, you want to buy better clothes, and or you want to have a bigger career, or you want to, or this idea of just growth, which is very prevalent in our world. It's really the basis of our world. When politicians and economists talk about it, they always talk about growth and GDP and how much the economy grew, and sales, and companies measure their progress on how much they sold. And all of this growth did not really sit well with me, because to me it's like, is this even possible? How can we grow infinitely in a finite world, right? And how much is too much, or how little is too little, when our time is limited? And talking about time and talking about liberty, he was talking about how being free is when you don't have to do something by obligation, because when you're obliged to do something, well, then you're not free anymore, right? If you're doing something because you have to do it. But then if you get to have freedom, if you get to have some free time, what would you use it for? And he was saying, and this may be very simple, but he was like, you can lay under a tree and just watch the leaves and breathe the air. And it was such a beautiful idea that years later it connected when I read the biography of Andrew Carnegie, the big business person, American business person, titan of the steel industry, after which Carnegie Hall is named, because he was also a big philanthropist, working his whole life and building a big empire, and enjoying all the good things of life, like traveling and good food and good wine and great company and wonderful music. And at the end of his life, he would spend hours in his garden just looking at flowers. And it seems like he realized that some of the most valuable things in life can't really be bought. And not just that, they're already there for us. We have a planet that gives us food. We have a planet that gives us water. It literally falls from the sky, and food literally grows on the trees. And sometimes they say money doesn't grow on trees, but why would you need the money if the fruit is literally there, right? So the idea of how to spend my time ended up connecting a lot with something that was originally a sort of, so to speak, frustration when it came to my musical life in my early youth, because my origins in music were not conventional. I come from a family that was not particularly, interested in the whole world of classical music because their interests were others, right? So even though it was their initiative to put me in piano lessons, in music lessons, for which I'm very grateful now, and we would sometimes listen to classical music, but this was not with any sort of purpose of being professional or anything like that. Plus, in the city of Monterrey, there was not even that much culture. Sure, there was an orchestra, which I never even went to see until maybe I was 17 years old or so. I never really went to a piano recital until I was 13, and that's because the organizer of this festival sent some tickets to our home because we were in the mailing list because we had purchased like a keyboard there or something. So it seemed like there was a lot that was just not part of my life that later I learned that is a big part of a lot of professional musicians' lives. When I came to New York, I realized how behind I was in so many ways, and I wanted to be a pianist, and I was 21 years old, 22 years old, and maybe I had been to a couple of competitions in my life, and I realized that the pianists that were there had already been to like dozens and dozens of competitions. Like people who lived in Europe, first of all, they studied with teachers who were also part of that industry, who had grown up in that industry, so they already could teach their students about the experience of what it is like to be in the circuit of pianists, and how you have to go to piano festivals, and how you have to go to competitions, and how you have to go network and go to concerts and then meet the managers and all of this stuff that becomes part of the world, right? And listening to the recordings and watching the artists. And of course, if you live in Europe, this is way easier. Or if you grow up in a very musical family, or if you grow up in a very musical environment or cultural environment. And also, of course, if you grow up with enough resources to buy a grand piano and study in a piano, or to be able to go to these competitions, all of that takes resources. So I realized how behind I was on all of this, and how no matter how much I worked, I would never be able to catch up on that same path. So it was unclear to me how would I be able to even get on any sort of path, because it seemed like there's one path or nothing else. The same thing with the other interests I had at the time. By that time I already loved accompanying singers. I loved opera. And this is something that I would do in my hometown of Monterrey with the other students because it's fun, and I liked it, and my teacher encouraged me to do it. And coming to New York, I realized also that there's a whole path, but that by the time I got there, there's people that had been on that path for years. If you want to be a coach, an opera coach, people were like completely in that path, that they have abandoned the sort of idea of a solo career and the solo repertoire already some time ago, and dedicated themselves fully to the world of opera, and learning the repertoire and learning the languages and listening to the recordings and knowing who are the great singers, who are the great conductors, what's happening today in the world, going to the operas and all of that. It's a whole universe in which I realized that I was also behind, and that there's also a path, that if you want to enter that path, you have to follow certain lines on. Yes, you study collaborative piano, you immerse yourself in this world, and then you go to young artist programs, you go to summer festivals, then hopefully you become like the repetitor of some small opera company, and you move from smaller opera companies to medium opera companies until you hopefully make it to a big opera company. And this is a path. And to me, it was clear that I was not going to get on that path anytime soon, because I was also pursuing a solo career. And then I also discovered what the path for conductors was. And this was even more out of reach, because at the end, as a conductor, you need an instrument, and that instrument is an orchestra. And if you think that a piano or a violin are expensive, now imagine a whole orchestra. So how do you learn how to conduct, well, you need to find orchestras, and there's a path for this. Besides studying conducting, besides finding a degree, a place where you can actually be rehearsing week over week and have a teacher who can guide you, then you also have to do master classes all over the world. There's a circuit. There's even web pages, just like there are for piano. There's the Alink Argerich Foundation that lists all the piano competitions, and there's a YAP tracker that lists all the young artist programs for opera singers. There's also a conducting masterclass, a blog online that lists all the conducting opportunities that are, and there are a ton, and people go to that circuit, and it's like, spend your money and go travel, go to Europe, go to Asia, go to the US, meet the different conductors, gain experience, and later go to competitions, and also immerse yourself in this world, which is listen to the recordings, get to know the repertoire, study all this repertoire, know who were the great conductors of the past, know who are the great conductors today, etc., etc. So by the time I am 22, 24 years old as a pianist, there's already conductors that have been on this path for years. You know, someone like Dudamel, who grows up in El Sistema, he grows up plays the violin inside the orchestra. So by the time he's like 12, 13, he has already played so much repertoire inside the orchestra, things that I'm not even familiar with, right? They have already played them so many times, right? And then you start conducting when you're like 11 or 12. That will get you ahead, you know? So I realized that I was not going to be able to get into any of those paths. So what to do? And this is where the idea connects with José Mujica's principle or philosophy or idea on how do you want to spend your time, right? And I realized that I wanted to spend my time making music. And if I was not going to be able to get into any of these traditional paths, because it would be impossible to really catch up to any of those, then I would have to just create my own and make my own and not be dragged by this sort of like conveyor belt of the industry. And for better or worse, have my own path, which means I decide how I want to spend my time. And then hopefully whatever we call the market gets to appreciate anything of what I do, and I get to maybe make a living doing whatever of these things I want to do. But the most important thing is I want to spend my time making music, and I want to spend my time making the music that I like and making the music that I want to make, that music that touches me, that motivates me, that makes me want to study it and makes me want to share it with the whole world. So fast forward, and this is a little bit how my life looks like. And of course, it is very not conventional. But I consider myself lucky in the sense that, especially if I look back at this month that I just described to you, I think 22-year-old me would have been proud of it. He would have been like, okay, well, he is accompanying great singers in wonderful repertoire with the Rückert Lieder by Mahler and the Gypsy songs and the love songs by Dvorak. And he's also conducting with his own orchestra. And he's also conducting opera in a worldwide project that is also educational, which is also a big passion of mine. And then there's also a recital at Carnegie Hall. So I think 22-year-old me would have been proud about this, even if, as is our human nature, we're always wondering what else, how can we grow, how can we always, it's a trap that it's easy to fall into, you know. Where do I want my career to be? Where do I want to go next, you know? And to me, the guiding principle for that has to always be not how do I want my career to look like in the outside, because at the end that's just that's just superficial, you know. That's just the surface of it. People can look at a career and be like, oh, that's wonderful, you know, he's doing this or that or anything, right? It's like watching an Instagram grid. At the end, that is no reflection on how your actual everyday life looks like and how your day, how your hour to hour looks like. And this is the guiding principle. I want to enjoy and I want to be in control of how that hour to hour passes, you know, and how my everyday life looks like, and whether I'm happy with this. So enough of that. That's just a reflection on how José Mujica actually influenced the way my life took a path. And the reason why I'm talking about him is because he passed away at 89 years of age. And I think it's an important moment for the world. And hopefully some of his teachings will resurface in a world that's more and more being having a backlash of narcissism and of ego-centered ideals and politics. I don't think this is very good or hopeful for our world. We need politics and ideals that are centered not on narcissism but on the opposite of it, which is care, which is not the ego but the rest of us. You know, how big can our hug be, which is these are words by Mujica. Our hug needs to be bigger, our embrace needs to be wider. And this is funny because there used to be a saying in Mexico, el que mucho abarca, poco aprieta. He who embraces a lot will get to tight very little, which is the sense of somebody when somebody is stretched thin, right? And that has always been, in a way, criticism that people would make of my life, on like, you know, you're doing too many things. And maybe some of it is true, but it's just this idea of how I just want to embrace everything, you know, and at the end, life is so short that I don't have time to become a specialist, you know, to focus on just one thing when there's just so many things to love and so many things to share. And the idea of forming Vincerò and sharing so much with so many students and so many wonderful young artists from all over the world is something that brings so much joy to me and to my life. And the idea of having this orchestra in Monterrey, La Súper, which is comprised of alumni or advanced students from the conservatory in Monterrey, is also inspiring to me. The idea that as the maestro, hopefully I can be of some sort of inspiration or motivation to these musicians, which is also a big responsibility. It's my embrace, you know. So talking about embracing music and the music that I embrace and the music that touches me, this is why I do what I do, because at the end I can't choose. I can't really choose what did I enjoy the most in this last month. Every experience is so different, and every experience has its richness, and I want to share some of it with you. Starting with the singers, first of all, in contrast with any piano solo experience, you have the company, and that's already something beautiful. The fact that you get to collaborate with others in a sort of equal to equal setting. At the end, usually it depends on the dynamic. Sometimes you find yourself as a pianist accompanying a very renowned, very experienced singer, and maybe in that case you have to defer to them and to their experience and to their ideas. Sometimes you find yourself accompanying a young singer that you have been coaching, or that they consider you their teacher or their coach. So in that case, usually they will defer to you, to your ideas, and to your, you know, musical thoughts. And in the case of Sushan and Anya, who are people that I've met, Anya, she was my coachee at Manhattan School of Music years ago, and then last fall, both of them were singing under my baton, so I was the maestro. So in a way, there is a level of respect towards me, but I would still see them as sort of as equals in this collaboration. And because I think even regardless of what the actual dynamics are amongst the interpreters that involve like the career or their age or their experience or anything, the hierarchy, so to speak, of the collaboration is determined by the music. And the way the music is written is really for the performers to be equals. So when you're a pianist and you're doing Mahler, you really have to know what the singer is doing. You really, if you don't speak German, you better translate the whole thing, and you better not just look for a translation online. If you're going to look for one, it will only be as a guide for when you do your own translation word by word with the dictionary or with Google Translate if you want. But you have to do it yourself, and then maybe compare with an online translation and see how you can like piece it all together. But you have to internalize it like this. You have to absorb the poetry almost as if you were gonna sing it, and then you have to sing it yourself. Even if you don't have a great voice and hopefully never will listen to you sing it, but you still have to sing it because you have to know what the singer is gonna go through. Where are they gonna breathe, or how difficult the phrase is gonna be, or how difficult will maybe be to pick a note or another. So you really have to know what the singer is doing because that informs how you're gonna play. And the poetry is so important because you cannot play if they're talking about the ruffling of the feathers, or if you're talking about a beautiful smell of a linden tree. That will inform how you're gonna play that music. Or in Dvorak, if you're talking about the songs my mother taught me, that informs how you play, what kind of colors you bring out of the piano. And they have to stem from your own imagination, and that imagination will only be activated if you have the poetry in you, and the music in you. So it's a beautiful process that I do recommend to every single pianist to go through, no matter what you consider yourself to be, whether you're more of a soloist or maybe you're more of a chamber musician or anything. You have to study songs, because that's also where you get to learn to know the composers the best, because it's a very intimate format where they get to pour a lot of their universe. So every single song ends up becoming a little universe where you get to know the language of the composer and their fantasy, their imagination, what inspires them to create a particular sounds, particular textures, particular forms of phrasing and emotions. So this, as you can see by the way I speak about it, this is something that I'm passionate about and that I fully and absolutely enjoy. And on practical matters, you have the advantage that you're not playing by memory. You have to use the score. Actually, even if you were to know everything by memory, which many times is the case if you practiced enough, the responsible thing is to have the music in front of you, because at the end you're supporting the singers, and sometimes the singers can make mistakes, and you have to be ready to protect them, and you have to be ready to embrace them and to catch them wherever they are. And many other times they will get inspired and they will do something beautiful that they never did in rehearsal, and you have to be ready for that too. At the end, I do see the role of the collaborative pianist as someone who will make the singer shine. Ultimately, it's about making the music shine, about the people saying, wow, Mahler was great, wow, Dvorak was great. And maybe they will say, well, and this singer is amazing because they can transmit it very well. And maybe at the end they will notice the pianist, right? Generally, it tends to be a kind of ungrateful profession, because and this also happens when you're like a rehearsal pianist in an opera company, because people will only notice you when you make a mistake, and if you're doing things well, many times they won't acknowledge you, or they will only acknowledge you at the end or whatever, you know. It doesn't matter. You will be acknowledged if you do a good job, I promise you, but it's not nowhere near the level of adulation or of the spotlight that you will get as a solo pianist or as a conductor. So if what motivates you is the spotlight, then maybe being a collaborative pianist may not be for you. But I would encourage you to find motivation outside the spotlight and outside the applause and outside the headlines, to seeing your name on the marquee, because the music can be a very, very powerful motivator in and of itself. Next, I went to conduct the orchestra, to conduct La Súper. And of course, conducting is a whole nother animal. And this happens to a lot of instrumentalists, especially when you're good at your instrument and you consider yourself to be a good musician and someone who has mastered the technique of the instrument and who has a lot of musical ideas. When you go into conducting, you think that this is what you have to offer, and maybe that is true because you're bringing all these musical ideas, and you think that if only I get the chance to be in front of the musicians, I will show how well they can play, And this can happen especially when you see it's a great exercise to find yourself surrounded by conductors, watching other conductors. They will have opinions, and most of them will think that they can do a better job than whoever is at the podium at the moment. And maybe you need some of that in order to be a conductor, right? And to pursue being a conductor. Otherwise, why would you do it, right? So you go to an orchestra for the first time, once you get lucky enough to finally have one that's willing to play under your baton. And you realize that your musical ideas are worth nothing if your beat is not clear. And believe me, no matter how much technique you have studied, the first time you stand in front of an orchestra, it's gonna be tough, it's gonna be rough. Your beat is not gonna be clear. You're gonna be thrown off because the orchestra is always later than you. So then you start sort of following them and things start getting slower. That's a problem. So you're gonna have to learn to master that, and master not just how to have a clear beat, but have a consistent beat, and then figure out how you're gonna do the tempo changes whenever the beat changes. It's a whole thing, right? And that's one part of it. Let's say you master that. Next thing is something that people only, again, realize with practice, is how to carry a rehearsal. Rehearsals are difficult because you have limited time, and if you were used to, as an instrumentalist, to just be very meticulous and to go, and a lot of people, this is a common mistake of let's say beginner conductors, is to think that they're gonna be the ones to raise the level of the orchestra by being the most picky possible, and they start stopping every single bar and sort of showing how good their ear is, that they can notice every single mistake. So then what happens? Your orchestra gets demoralized. You're just stopping the whole time. They don't get to play through the whole thing, and you don't even give them the chance to fix things on their own, because many times, especially on a first rehearsal, especially with a professional orchestra, they know exactly when they made a mistake, when they didn't entirely understand what you wanted to do the first time around, but then they got it, so the second time they will be able to do it. And there's a lot of times they get fixed on their own. And that's just to give an example of the kind of mistakes that young conductors can make. So it takes a while to learn really how to carry a rehearsal, and how to keep the players motivated, and how to try to have high artistic standards and high technical standards on you want them to play in tune, you want them to play in rhythm, you want them to do what's written in the score, right, without you having to spell it out for them that it's forte or that it's piano. or you want them to do the articulations, the way they are there, so that you don't have to waste time telling them, maestro, this is an staccato, not legato, or whatever, right? But then on top of that, hopefully inspire them to not just give you that, but to give you the emotion of the music. And you have to figure out if sometimes they just need you to conduct with that emotion. Sometimes they need you to talk about it, hopefully not too much, but sometimes they may need that. Sometimes they just may need you to lighten up the atmosphere with some joke or something that releases some of the tension that gets built up throughout the rehearsal. Sometimes you may need to do the pause a little earlier if you feel like they need a break. So it takes a lot of sensitivity. So as you can see, the way I'm describing this experience even of conducting, which the culmination of it is the concert, but it's really, you have a week, or many times less than a week, of work. And that is part of what this is. Just like with the singers, there's rehearsal prior, but the process is much different, right? You can get together somewhere and maybe like be in a much more relaxed atmosphere. You don't really have a time limit unless you rented a space, but many times you will figure out a way to have a rehearsal where you can maybe take a break and maybe have some tea, or maybe have a drink, or whatever, right? Get some water, get some fresh air, talk a little bit, sing the next song, then talk a little more. It's a different atmosphere when you're rehearsing with a singer. Or sometimes it can be very, very focused, and then you finish early and all is good, right? With the orchestra, it's a very strict timeline where you have rehearsals that start at a certain time and then they finish at a certain time. You have to have a pause of this many minutes, and you better get your job done during that time. So it's a wonderful process, and it requires you to really be sensitive and be in touch with what the musicians need. And how can you help? How can you make this better? So it is a very enjoyable process. It is a very taxing process, physically, emotionally. But at the end, of course, once you get to the performance, it's very enjoyable, because if you did your job in the rehearsals, then a lot of the work is done. At least a lot of your work is done, and now it's up to them they're the ones playing the notes and the concert. And you're the one, in a way, guiding them. And even though it's very exciting, and of course there is pressure, but in my personal experience, the most pressure is probably there in the first rehearsal, especially the more experienced the orchestra is. That's when you really have to prove that you know what you're doing, and that's where you better show that you came prepared. By the day you get to the concert, well, obviously you're prepared, right? Because you've been rehearsing with them, so you better know it by now. But really, it's more about guiding them and being sort of a source of inspiration at the moment. And of course, having the audience is much better, because you are really building this in real time. And another aspect of conducting that I want to just finish with that, because it's rarely talked about, and I realized this the other day when I was describing it to a friend that works in the pop world and stuff, is that in acoustic music, there's of course no audio engineer to do the mixing and the balancing. In reality, it is the conductor who is this audio engineer doing the mixing and the balancing. When you see a symphony by Beethoven and he writes forte, and if you see the score, it says flutes, it says oboe, it says bassoon, clarinet, it says horns, and then trumpets, and then it says strings, violins, first and seconds, violas, cellos, double bass. It doesn't really say how many strings are there going to be, and usually this is a thing that has to do with preference of the conductor and definitely of budget. Some orchestras have a lot of strings, and then when they have a lot of strings, they end up doubling the woodwind so that the volume will match and correspond. But in reality, it's like it depends on the orchestra on how many musicians are going to be playing. So each interpretation of a Beethoven symphony, the same Beethoven symphony could have a different number of musicians playing it. And I feel like sometimes the audience is not fully aware of this. And also, the musicians are of different levels, different capacities, different sound qualities. The instruments are different. A Stradivarius cello, of course, produces a much bigger, richer sound than the cello of a player in a youth orchestra, right? So, if you see forte and the musicians just play forte, just play loud, that doesn't mean it's just going to automatically work out and sound exactly the way Beethoven wanted it to sound. Many, many times in Beethoven symphonies, the trumpets will be too loud, because they just overpower everything and it's just one note. So the conductor has to realize that it's a big part of their job to just be balancing constantly, to listen. And in order to do that, the conductor needs to know what is important, just like a pianist needs to know where is the melody, where is the accompaniment, and you have to bring out the melody and quiet down the accompaniment and have your ears ready for that. Same thing with an orchestra. You're doing that all the time. You're doing that in rehearsal. You're doing that in real time. Why? In order to guide. That way you guide the audience through the storytelling. Now the melody is in the cellos. Now the melody goes to the oboe. Now the melody goes to the horn, and so on and so forth. And then there's also the sense of timing on how much breathing is required between one phrase and another. Sometimes, depending on the acoustic of the hall, a big chord will resonate longer. Therefore, you need a bit more time between that big chord and the next one, especially if the next one brings a change of atmosphere. So these are things that are happening on real time, for which you need to have your ears and your sensitivity very, very attuned. So this is a lot of what I love about conducting. It's so different from accompanying singers at the piano. You're dealing with this whole universe of sound, this whole variety of colors, and you have to still tell a coherent story, a story that's in the score, but sometimes it's not that obvious in the score. At the end, you still see all the instruments, and you have to be the one deciphering what's important. And of course, if you do that well, most likely it will sound very natural and very organic, and people won't realize how difficult it is to do that. When you hear a good recording, especially for example of a Mozart, we got to play Mozart Eine kleine Nachtmusik, and when you get to hear a good recording, it sounds so natural and so obvious that only when you get to work this music with an orchestra live, you realize how difficult it is to achieve that result. How a small breath between phrases that gives you a sense of pacing is so difficult to achieve when you want 45 musicians to do that all together, all at the same time. So this is part of the fun of it. This is part of what's exciting. And when the result is good, there's such a great feeling of teamwork, of how we did this together, and you see how it's motivating to them to do a good job because they want the overall result, the final result, to be good. It's not about them, and I think this is a beautiful thing. There's a little bit of ego death if you really understand the spirit of an orchestra, in the sense that we're all there to serve the music. Like if all do our role well, and that's the pressure. That's where the pressure comes from. It's not because, I will have made a mistake. The music will have suffered. So that's why it's better for you to do a good job, not so that you get the applause, but so that the music works and that everyone feels like what we did was worth it. So I think this is a beautiful thing, especially when things go well. You can feel the joy and the camaraderie in the orchestra on doing something well, and on the audience appreciating it and the message having gone through, So that was really fun. And if this sounds like a lot of work on leading a whole orchestra, what came next was a whole other thing, conducting opera, because here's the combination of the singers and the orchestra. So what I talked about with accompanying singers is the same thing here, but now you have a libretto with a story, rather than just a poem of three, for a song of 3 minutes. Now you have a whole 2-hour long opera that you really have to understand. So if you're a responsible conductor, you better have, for La Traviata, you better have read The Lady of the Camellias by Alexander Dumas Jr., and you better know the libretto by heart so well, and you'll be able to speak it and to sing it and to have clear ideas on who each character is, what the relationships are between each other. It's almost like you're a movie director, right? And you're studying a libretto before you even get to the music. You get to know the script very, very well to have an idea of what you want. In this case, I was also involved with casting this opera together with the stage director, with Ragnar Conde. So it's a whole other job of knowing the opera so well that you can imagine what kind of people are required for each role. And in this case, I was very happy that we were able to cast it with the alumni and students of Vincerò Academy. Jamie Webb was Violetta Valéry, and Luis Cardoso was the Alfredo, and Alejandro Cardona was Luis Cornejo was Alfredo, Alejandro Cardona was the Germont. It was a beautiful cast. At the end, they all come with different experiences, different levels, different development, different stages in their vocal development, in their artistic development. So in this particular production, this is something that we also have to deal with, on how to balance all these elements. And then there's also the chorus, which is a community chorus that still ended up doing a great job. And staging this in 2 weeks is not easy at all. I was also the rehearsal pianist for the whole process, so I get to be playing the piano during the staging rehearsals and then conducting the orchestra throughout the rehearsals and the performance. So here we have a combination of what I talked about with the singers and with the orchestra. There's a lot of sensitivity involved because the psychology and the emotionality or the emotional process of orchestra musicians is much different than that of singers. Singers are much more exposed out there. Singers are the ones like putting on the costume and embodying a role in front of everyone, where they have to act and sing and be aware of what they're doing and pronounce the Italian correctly and sing some of the most difficult, well-known arias in history, while at the same time following the conductor. So there's a lot of pressure on them, and you have to understand that and support them, and be there to have their backs, because they have to be able to see you, and when they see you, they have to have peace and know that you're there with them and that you're going to follow them, you're going to lead them, you're going to guide them, you're going to hopefully mouth the lyrics so that if they get lost, you're there for them. So really you have to be this support system for them. Meanwhile, with the orchestra, you have to keep things together. Each orchestra is different. Some orchestras know the repertoire very well. They know what to expect. An orchestra like this in Mazatlan is a wonderful orchestra that is very used to accompanying opera. So it's very used to all the weird things that happen in an opera, where the tempo changes and suddenly the singer is staying much longer in a phrase, or sometimes rushing through the phrase because they're running out of breath. So all of those things this orchestra is used to, they hadn't necessarily played this opera in a long time. So a lot of the things they are reading, and they're getting to know the music and familiarizing themselves with it. So the job of the conductor is to pick your battles, figure out what's important. You need to keep it together. You need the orchestra to hopefully be in tune, to be in tempo, to be balanced. And you have to achieve the best result possible in 4 days of rehearsals. So you better learn how to pick your battles. You better learn how to prioritize and figure out what needs to be done and what hopefully will get fixed on its own and what hopefully will only require you to conduct in a specific way, and what requires you to stop the rehearsal and make a correction, or what requires you to keep the rehearsal going but then go and talk to the musician directly and be like, hey, in this bar, can we do this or that? Can you please fix it? So it is a lot of fun. It is, in a way, exhausting. I would not say it's stressful because I really enjoy it. It feels stressful. Anybody watching from the outside and looking at the process would be like, whoa, this is a lot. And it could be a lot if it were not because I enjoy it so much. And this is the thing, I spent a month and doing this, and then after finishing with La Traviata, I had to now go back and prepare this big recital for Monterrey and for Carnegie Hall. If I was doing any of this because I felt it was an obligation, or if I was doing any of this only because I was hired to do it, so I have to do it because of the money, or if I was doing any of this because I have to do it because my agent told me, or because my career has to go in this or that direction, I think it would be a completely different story. I was doing each and every single one of these things because I wanted to be doing them, because I was enjoying them, and because that's what I wanted for my life. I wanted to do opera, I wanted to conduct, I wanted to work with singers, I wanted to do piano recitals, and I got to do that, and I got to do that at a level that I get to be satisfied. I never get to be fully satisfied. I always think there's so much more that could have been done, so many things that could be better if only there was more time, if only there was more budget, if only the hall was better, if only this or that. But we work with what we have, and that's part of the joy. That's part of the joy of music. So I want to leave you with the famous Brindisi, the chorus Libiamo from La Traviata. This is from Act 1, and this is Jamie Webb singing Violetta and Luis Cornejo singing Alfredo. And I hope you enjoy this, because it's incredible to think that this is put together in such little time, that this is a community chorus with people that are not full-time musicians whatsoever. They all have like day jobs, and they come to rehearsal at night to learn this, which is not easy at all. You have the cast of Vincerò alumni who were all doing their role debut, singing this for the first time. And also you have this orchestra, which is a chamber orchestra, so it's much more pressure for them than when you have the big orchestra, and you can in a way rely much more on all your colleagues playing. Here, if you have like 7 violins and 2 violas and 2 cellos and 1 double bass and 1 of each instrument of the woodwinds, the pressure is on, because every single instrumentalist in the orchestra is almost like a soloist. So I think it speaks very highly of them, how it ended up sounding. It speaks very highly of everyone. So that's why I want to leave you with this, and with a toast to joy, and for all of you to reflect on how you want to spend your time, on how your life is short, and time is money, but also money is time. And a lot of the time that we spend chasing money, we may regret it later in our lives, because the one thing that I loved about him, it was him saying that we're gonna get old, and our bodies are not gonna respond to us the way we were used to, and we will be able to look at the mirror, and we should think, did we betray that child that we have inside? And by then it might have been too late. So this is the day to think of that. Look at myself, wake up in the morning, look at myself in the mirror, and think about, what would this child want to do today? What does this child want to eat? What does this child want to play? What does this child want to study? Play. Let's play. Let's go to the piano and let's play. Let's go to the orchestra and let's play. My name is Abdiel Vázquez. This is Maestro in Tune. I'll see you next time.